Okay, we are live. And this is Senate Finance. It is Wednesday, February 21st. And we are going to take up school finance discussion. And Ben Kingsley is here from Principal of Imperium Advisors. Cedric, this was your request, so why don't you set the stage?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So Ben Kingsley, I've never met in person. I've just received a letter from him and I'm on the distribution list for Campaign for Vermont. And I've heard him speak on the radio. And approximately 3 weeks ago, in conjunction with the letter he sent all of us, he just had some interesting points about spending in our school districts as well as the overall education fund formula. He also cited a source that showed Vermont as the lowest staff per pupil ratio. So I was just interested to hear more, and he offered in his email that if he would like to hear more of Senate Finance, I just wanted to draw attention because I was intrigued by a lot of his recent letters.
No, we are looking for all the help we can get at this point. So, Mr. Kingsley, you're on the screen. Just identify yourself and who you represent, and then the floor is yours.
For the record, my name is Ben Kingsley. I am the owner and operator of Imperium Advisors, which is a public policy consulting firm based out of Burlington. And I'm also on the board of directors for Campaign for Vermont. And I've worked in education policy, particularly finance policy, for the last decade or so, mostly under the umbrella of Campaign for Vermont and looking at how we address some of the education and property tax challenges that we have here in the state. So I do have a document that is posted on the committee website. I am happy to pull that up on my screen as well if you'd rather.
It'd be helpful because then people that are watching us on the internet and people in the room can see that.
Sure. Just give me one second. I'll get that going.
Is anybody else having trouble getting on the Wi-Fi in here? All they told me to do is go on, shut it on and put it off, because it won't let me access anything. Okay. I
Turn
shut
it off and then turn it on.
Yeah, and now I've got the handouts.
Yeah, all over with all sorts of apparatus.
Yeah.
Turning it off and leaving it off. is much better.
Sometimes I think hitting it with a hammer would be better. Okay. Okay. We have it, we're having trouble getting it up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having a struggle here. Let's try it. Just do this.
I think you were just made the co-host, Mr. Kingsley, so I don't know if you checked the controls in the Zoom client again, but I'm guessing you should. There you go.
There we are. Okay. So, sorry for that. So, I think, I know my time is short here with you guys today. I want to kind of focus very high level on some of the things that I've seen looking at education policy and education finance policy here in the state. I think one of the important things is kind of defining how we ended up here in, what we're looking at is a 20% increase in property taxes. I think there's a number of contributing factors to this. The primary one being a spending increase of $200 million over the current fiscal year. Depending on how you measure that number, it could be anywhere from 220 to 240 $1 million in increased spending. And it's over $900 million over the last 10 years. So it's not just a 1 year problem. It's, really kind of continued on for for quite a while now. Part of the reason that I think we're seeing such a large increase in property taxes this year, one, of course, is Act 127, which a number of people have been talking about, and the incentive structure that created. I can go into more detail around that, but I think you all have a pretty good understanding.
We fixed that as of an hour.
The 5% cap was certainly.
That cap is gone.
Yep. And then also, of course, federal funds that are receding this year, as well as consumption taxes that have been pretty high, pretty high revenues the last couple days, like the last couple of years. Those are going away, and of course, that's causing challenges for school budgets as well. And I would categorize those first three things of like, why this year? Why are we seeing such a large jump in this particular year? I think the last 2 points on this slide are more related to longer term trends. One of which is the lack of transparency and accountability in the system as a whole. We have a system where spending decisions are made locally, but taxing decisions are made at a statewide level. And the results of that is that, at the district level, school boards can point to the legislature for taxes increasing, and the legislature can point to school boards for spending increasing. And, voters and property taxpayers are kind of left trying to sort out, what is true and what's not, and how does this system work? And that system, I think, is largely been a reason why we've ended up here over the last couple of decades. And I think also the other thing that, and probably in conjunction with that, is the fact that we have a system that was built for 20,000 more students than we have, both infrastructure and staffing. And we've been slow to adjust to that as a state, and it could be partially that, coupled with a couple of these other factors, is why that transition has been slow. One of the things I would point to is the fact that we have the lowest student teacher ratio in the country, and it's again, that's moved quite a bit. We used to be somewhat in line with a cohort of regional states, and now we're pretty far out of line with that cohort of regional states. You can see there's a grouping here, just so you kind of have, for scale, this is about 12 students per teacher. Vermont's pretty far below that average of northeastern states. We can see like Connecticut and Massachusetts and New Hampshire are kind of a little bit above 12. That 12 student to staff ratio. The national average is 15, so we're quite a bit below the national average. And again, I think this is not, necessarily a policy decision. This has just happened over time, that we've ended up here as students, but haven't necessarily adjusted our staffing levels to in line with that. What that's done is that has pushed us up to the second highest cost per student in the country. So this is, I believe this is data from 2 years ago, but 24,666. They're behind only New York. New York's the only state that spends more. Their student teacher ratio is higher than ours, but they pay their teachers more. So that's why they end up spending a little more per student than we do. Any questions on this before I kind of move into like some of the potential solutions that you all could look at?
I don't see any questions. I think we know all of this. I'm looking forward to solutions.
Excellent.
That's what I'm looking for right now.
Yeah, and I will preface this by saying I certainly don't have all the answers, but I can what I'm hoping to be helpful to you all in is giving you some directions in which you may want to look for how we start right-sizing the system. Things that have been tried already, obviously, are consolidation. I started working on education policy just before the Act 46 discussions started. So I was involved in a number of those. I think there's still a number of unanswered questions about how effective school district consolidation was. I know the House is already starting to look in that direction. That may or may not be the most effective path forward. I think external revenue is also a factor. Finding new revenue sources for the education fund is a direction that the House Ways and Means Committee is already starting to look. I think you want to be careful going down that path because yes, you could find other revenues that would buy down the property tax rate. But a lot of those revenues are likely going to be more regressive than the property tax mechanism we have in place today. So I think you want to be careful that you don't inadvertently shift more of that tax burden onto low and middle income folks. And also, I'd say as a non-property tax revenue mechanism into the education fund, I think one of the things we might be seeing over the last couple of decades is contributing to the disassociation between local spending decisions and local tax rates. As you kind of further dilute the pot of education monies, you're less dependent upon property taxes, which means that boards, local school boards and school districts don't feel the impacts of their spending decisions as much because the local property tax rate is what adjusts based on those spending decisions.
Okay, well, we went to consumption tax, the sales tax, and replaced it with the old system where there was a transfer from the general fund with a built-in inflator every year. Because like this year, during the Great Recession, this year we are in very tight straits here, and making cuts we don't think are wise or not doing things we'd like to. The schools used to not feel any of that pressure. This year, yeah, the revenues are down because the federal stimulus grants didn't go out to people and they aren't buying washers and dryers this year. And so the schools have got there's less revenue, but the schools are bringing in historically high spending. And right now, we don't have a choice. If the voters vote to spend $200 million more than they did last year, the legislature raises the taxes to pay it. That's the property tax. I think that system has frustrated almost everyone in this building, at least in committees for years. We're trying to figure out how we get a handle on that.
Yeah, and I think it is a difficult situation because I kind of point back to like we have a statewide taxing system, but a local spending system, right? And how do you bring those two things together in a way that is less frustrating? I think that this year in particular, right? We're going to see that spending come down to some degree. I don't know how much it's going to come down, but I think that school boards and voters will react to the changes that you made in H850 to remove that tax cap. So districts will feel more of the burden of those spending decisions this year. But again, I think as we start talking about other revenue sources that are non-property tax sources, I think that may be one of the things that is contributing to some of that disassociation is the fact that we continue to add other revenues into that education fund that are not property taxes, and that kind of dilutes the impact of local spending decisions.
Well, we used to have each town ran on its own grand list, its own revenue. The Supreme Court has ended that, so that's a given.
Yeah, and I don't think we should go back to that. And I think that, we certainly can't go back to that. And I even would say that Act 127 was the right thing to do. I don't think that is inherently the problem, although there are 2/3 of districts that are increasing their tax capacity under Act 127, and a third of districts are losing. And I think one of the things, and there's not great data on this at the moment, but one of the things we might also be seeing is that the districts that gain tax capacity are spending up faster than the districts that lost tax capacity are spending down.
They are. The people that are losing have pointed that out to us more than once.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
I think I've got two questions, Senator McDonald and then Senator Chittenden.
Or question, Madam Chair, I should have asked sooner. With the Supreme Court ruling where the state is now paying for education in parochial schools, private schools, how are those numbers, those additional students being accounted for or are they not being accounted for in per pupil spending?
Okay, yeah.
They are being accounted for because the sending district still has to account for them and report those spending per student numbers back to the Agency of Education and to the federal agencies.
But before the ruling, they were not public school students, they were parochial school students that weren't mandated that the state was paying for them. So how does that affect the state spending on, now that we have more kids that have to be paid for?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not sure what the financial impact of that specific situation is, but I can do some digging on that and perhaps get you an answer.
So maybe that's something.
You think we're picking up the bill for private schools of?
When we get the answer, we'll be able to make a more informed opinion.
Yeah. Okay, somebody.
What I would say is that's a pretty small chunk of the overall student population, overall spending, at least if we're talking about the town tuitioning program. It's a pretty minor impact overall. And the tuition rates there seem to be lower than the statewide averages. So that may be helpful.
Mr. Kinsley, I have a question that's spurred by your slide that might be more posed to the committee at large on this what's been tried, number 4, excess spending penalties. My understanding is we had that in place for many years and we recently suspended it, but I also recently been told that it's set to come back in 2029.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is I think that is different than a spending cap, which has been floated in the last couple of days, but this is certainly more than considering further spending penalties where I'd love to explore that further. As a
Yeah,
committee.
we will. The excess spending penalty was taken off when 1/1/27 for I believe it was 5 years. Because we were looking at a 5-year transition. And especially where Winooski spending has gone up 40% this year because the taxing capacity is. But they were underfunded for years and they didn't want to penalize towns who were picking up, a whole lot of new students. But now with the phase in and we're gonna look at that.
I guess my question with some of the longer running senators is, do you think that it worked for many years as a stick to keep districts in conscientious of their spending?
Yes, we had,
Not saying bring it back this year.
no,
maybe
we
it's
had
5
one
years
school
time.
that consistently ran up against it. If the voters in that town choose to spend that much, under the present law, we can't do much about it. We did put a penalty on there, and this was another small, I think it was in Addison County. I think they may have merged, but
But it's less finite than a
Yeah.
cap. It's
Yes.
just a disincentive.
I mean,
Sure,
we've
sure.
got 2 problems. What are we gonna do about this year? Because if all the budgets pass, we have a new base that is much higher, so they'll only go up 3% next year, but it's from a much higher base. And some people are gonna be really hurt by that big jump. And then we've got the ongoing, is this the best system? Obviously, almost every other state is delivering it. More cost effectively. And I have a feeling, having been to school in New York, that, and they have statewide regents tests, at least they used to, that their education is probably better than ours.
The National Center for Education Statistics would agree with you on that point. I think one of the things I would offer to the committee is what I think I would recommend doing is looking at and perhaps commissioning a study, sort of like the blue ribbon studies that we saw back in the over a decade ago, of folks to look at all the incentives in the system, because one of the things we really saw this year, and I think we've seen it for a while, is that if you put free money on the table with like that 5% tax rate cap, districts will spend it. So I think examining what other free money, quote unquote, might be in the system is, and what the incentive structure is for school districts and what's driving their spending, I think is a worthwhile exercise. I think we all learn a lot from that. Then my second recommendation would be to try to put some mechanisms in place to bring the student staff ratios back into alignment with some of our peers, somewhere in that neighborhood of 12 and a half
We've
students.
been trying that for a decade and we have made no dent. I would love to hire a consultant to help us walk through this, but unlike the schools, the state is on an austerity budget. And I'm assuming I'm looking at several $100,000 to, we're level funding all our community-based services, so we're not gonna have the money this year, and the problem is this year.
Right.
If we can get this year's property tax under control, then maybe we can buy ourselves some time to look at the system. I think it is inherently an expensive and inefficient system when you look at the demands of modern education. We're doing a lot more than reading, writing, and arithmetic these days, so.
Yeah.
I think that we have no budget this year, and I don't know how we're gonna get through this.
Yeah, I think honestly, for the most part, this year's property taxes are probably in the hands of voters. I don't see many levers that the legislature can pull to solve this crisis this year without inflicting more pain somewhere else. And that's not a great position to be in. I'm sure it's not what the committee wants to hear, but I think for me, I'm looking long term at this point. How do we solve a longer term trend of increasing spending to the tune of almost $1 billion a decade?
Right. And our number of young families is school-age children are going down. People over 65 are going up, and the middle just seems to be stagnant, so it's not going down. We're working on housing because we can't get people here to work, so they can't afford to live here. And yeah, if this kind of an increase hits this year,
It's
given
devastating.
modern interest rates and most people won't be able to afford to own a home. It's gonna be pretty good. Okay, Senator Johnson.
So, in the notion of getting more in line with our peers, who are our peers?
From a staffing ratio, I would say honestly a good one to look at is Massachusetts. Um, they have I believe 12.5 students per
Yes,
per
if you
teacher.
can make that a little bigger because,
Go
no,
full
Sure.
screen.
yeah,
Yeah, let's see if we can zoom in here. Is that better? So this
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
Massachusetts right here. And they get some of the best outcomes in the country. In fact, they get some of the best outcomes in the world. So I'd say Massachusetts is a good one to look at. And they have a similar mix of like very urban and also quite rural. So we see kind of some similar demographic situations playing out there in Massachusetts as well.
we're definitely an outlier in that term. Senator Chit.
We're dabbling into a realm that I think is more germane to Senate education, but I will say if I was on Senate education, I'd love to hear from individuals like Jeff Bannon and so on as to why this is outside or why Vermont on this graph is so far outside the norm and what decisions are being made at the local level for paraeducators and so on that maybe we need to just revisit. and
Well,
consider
I think this is impacting the tax rates. That's ours. If Senate Education isn't doing this, then we will, because we need to get the tax rate under control, and that means we need to know what's driving it.
I've heard the governor say that he wants, besides a spending tax cap or besides a spending tax penalty, he also, I think, said something to the regard of a staff to pupil cap or ratio consideration. I don't know what that looks like. I don't think we've ever done it before,
The
but
governor hasn't talked to me.
yeah, I just don't know the radio.
Yeah, he's on the radio. We can look at all of those, but this administration, just in general, does not communicate with the legislature as frequently or as constructively as
But I'm hoping,
other administrations have.
hoping they're gonna announce a Secretary of Education soon and
That
maybe
would be
that
really
person
nice.
could come in and talk to some of these points.
Yeah, but there's vacancies there. So, if you look at that map or chart, we are definitely an outlier. And we will have Jeff in to talk to us. We've got Besser coming in, we're trying to get Besser to come in to talk to us about the insurance increase, because that was the governor's. Schools used to get their own contracts for insurance or negotiate them, I guess. They all go through Besser. But this did a statewide contract. And it's gone up, and everything went up a lot last year, but it's a top. It's a relatively young, healthy group. It's not retirees insurance. So I'd just like to take a look and see what's happening.
Well, I've taken up, I think, more time than we had allotted, but I'm happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
I had,
A lot
my
more to
next-
talk about this
you can
topic.
continue, because our next witness, our staff has to be in another committee at 2:45. We were just late getting on, we was late on the floor and a half hour late starting, so you can fill in the time there if you have more to give to us.
I'm sure we could spend a number of hours talking about this topic, but I'll try to keep it brief. My last few thoughts here. I think when we're talking about getting, setting a student teacher ratio target or a staffing ratio target or whatever, I think one of the important things to include in that conversation, again, I know this is probably not your committee's policy area, but making sure that they're performance based so that if we're doing reductions in force, we're retaining the most talented teachers. I think that's really important so that we continue to maintain or even improve the quality of education being provided. I think you heard the governor.
We had testimony yesterday, there is a teacher shortage. And schools want to keep their teachers, and so there is upward pressure on labor negotiations. And that we have a lot of teachers that are teaching that have, we call them emergency licenses, but they're not fully certified teachers, so we have a problem there. We've done everything we know how. We've got, I just saw in the budget, VSAC is doing scholarships for nurses. We're doing loan forgiveness. We're doing everything we can to encourage nurses and teachers to come here. So far,
Housing.
we haven't, yeah, we know we've got shortages. We've got a real labor shortage. We know
Yeah, I
they
think,
can't find homes, so we're getting hit on all sides.
yeah, it's tough to attract young teachers here when housing prices are what they are today. And I think one of the things we're seeing is there's a number of teachers that are starting to hit retirement age. So or approaching retirement age, and so trying to replace those teachers will be important. I think probably as a broader comment, I mean, we've seen what the teacher-student ratios look like at a statewide level. I think what that indicates to me, the fact that we're hearing districts saying we're understaffed, is what's that saying to me is that those teachers are not distributed in the right places. Because some districts are understaffed, other districts are overstaffed, and perhaps those teachers are not in the right places. So which sort of leads into like my final point, which is looking at administrative structures. So back during the Act 46 discussion, Tom Pelham and I had put out a report that had recommended moving towards regional education districts is what we would call them, but really they're larger supervisory unions that was centered around our tech centers. And I think one of the things that would do if we're starting to talk about, doing administrative structure consolidations, going from 62 supervisory unions down to 14 that are sort of centered around our tech centers makes a lot of sense, but it also increases the org size for them to redeploy teachers in a way that better meets students' needs.
I think we know that I chaired education when we did 46. And the reason was the very small schools are just not cost effective. You've got 34 kids in 6th grades. You could triple that and probably not have to triple the number of teachers. So we tried. The home rule is very tightly held in Vermont. It's not going to be given up easily. But I think we may this year reach the breaking point where the cost of those schools is starting to break back on taxpayers. I've chaired this committee for 20 years, breaking education in between. And I can't ever remember raising a tax, and yet I'm always accused of raising people's taxes. It's the property tax is the only one that goes up every year.
Yeah, and it's largely out of your control.
Yes.
I think, one of the things I think you're right. I think we're going to see some buildings close this year as in response to school budgets going down. I think some buildings are going to close. I've already heard from friends of mine that are on school boards that that's likely to happen. But I think the broader point is if we push our staffing base up to an SU level and make those SUs larger, suddenly, we can have a full-time teacher that splits their time between 2 schools. That happens today if a district operates 2 different schools. But if we push those types of staff up to the SU level, which is part of the conversation back during the Act 46 consolidations, but never really happened, there's potential to be more flexible with the staff we already have.
Yes. That's what we were hoping. But it had limited success. And at least one of my schools that is looking at close to a 40% tax increase got out of this union district it was in and has gone on its own. And they're being hurt this year. But there's been several districts that have gotten out of the unions. They like to control their own budget. But this year, but it's not just their budget, because their budget goes into the mix and it impacts everybody in the state's tax rate. So,
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the accountability argument because the tax rates are all, or the tax revenues are all pooled. I think that making sure that districts like auditing district budgets to make sure that they're, that they're spending on things that they say they're spending on. That was one of the things we saw a couple years ago when we did the block grant model for special ed was the reporting for special ed varied widely from district to district. And I think we might be seeing that in other areas as well.
I don't want to drag this out if you have move this along, Chair, but thank you, Ben, for raising that, because that's the other major area of interest I have. I understand the common ledger efforts have somewhat fizzled over the last couple of years, but I think we need to restart those, rekindle those, because we can't improve what we don't measure, and if we're not measuring things consistently across our districts, we can't compare outcomes relative to resources and methods. So I fully support restarting those conversations, and I appreciate the Chair saying that we'd be willing to hear from this Agency of Education on where that stands.
yes, believe appropriations has been trying to do that, it's common ledger. I think for 20 years,
This is the year.
this is the year, okay. You got a cattle prod or go talk to this business managers? Okay, Senator Bray.
Well, I would, second that. When I was on education, we talked about common ledger and also creating categories that would differentiate between, sort of mainstream educational services and social services delivered at the venue known as a school.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
we conflate the budgets, and I think it would be helpful to be able to see
Exactly, yeah.
we need to support both, but it would be helpful, I think, to see how we're spending that money more.
Well, I know appropriations is talking about having to look at core governmental functions and funding those before doing non-core funding. I think we can say that mental health and other social service agencies have been victims of level funding. On many occasions, they have not, even though they're essentially doing the work of the state, they're doing the mental health hands-on work. We have not allowed their wages to keep up. We haven't paid them enough for them to have wages that are competitive. And they're short-staffed, and COVID just added to that. So they should be doing the mental health. We should be paying those agencies to provide the mental health services in schools. They don't have the staff. They can't pay the staff. We've heard consistently that if you work for a mental health agency, you go to work for the state or school, you get paid $2,000 to $5,000 more day one, walk in the door. So we've created this inability of the agencies to meet the needs of the schools. And that's on us, and the schools are dealing with the kids with the issues, and they've hired their own people. And part of that is where we're getting the ratio of students to adults.
One of the reasons a decade ago from treating students in schools was that a decade ago, you could draw down the federal money for, not for education, but for
Social service.
for mental health. And I don't know if that's still the case today.
I know with special ed, we're drawing down all the Medicaid dollars that we can.
That was one of the reasons
Yeah,
that it was moved to the school, was to access Medicaid dollars.
yeah, and that might work very well. And maybe we will have the school business managers, anybody have some names you'd like to have in to talk about how those dynamics work.
Or perhaps they're not working as well as they once were.
And we think that the ESSER dollars are still used as the base from last year, even though they were a one-time grant, that they're in that base, and the base is much higher than it was 2 years ago because they're keeping that money in. Most of what they hired are behavioral interventionists, probably some educational enhancement people, but the behavioral problems in the school are not to be underestimated. Um, throwing just a second grader throwing a chair at a pregnant teacher is pretty rough stuff. And it's not rare, so. Okay, so where are we? I have got Kim Davis on at 2:15. Oh, we're way behind. Can we still get Kim Davis? He is up there. Okay, so I think we're gonna wrap this up. We just started way behind today because we were on the floor longer than normal. We're gonna have to start planning for that, because we will be on the floor longer than normal. And I think next Wednesday, or 1 o'clock, we might plan for starting later. Because, Proposition 1 is coming back, and I think we're gonna take that up on Wednesday, I think he said, so that will be a long time in the floor. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kensley, this is
Thank you.
helpful.
Hope so.
Okay, and I do get the notes every time somebody signs your petition. I've even read.
Excellent.
Okay, so we're gonna go back. I've got Timothy Davis, called me. I talked to him for quite a while. He is an independent insurance agent who has some very strong feelings about Medicare Advantage plans. I explained to him that we didn't think we had any power to do much of anything, but he wanted to talk to us, and so I said, fine. You remember the public wants to talk? We're open to hear.
Can you, I see the mute's off and the camera.
Okay, we can hear you. There you
There
go.
we go. How's that?
That's good.
Thank you. I just am commenting. I've read
Just a second. We need you to introduce yourself for the record and then tell us who you represent, what. I know what your qualifications are, but just say them for the record.
I'm sorry, Timothy B. Davis, and I'm an independent insurance agent here in Vermont. Have been for 20 years. I've worked quite a bit with both commercial lines, health insurance. I've worked with the state as a navigator, and I worked extensively with Medicare, Medicaid, both here and over in New York. I also work with some court-appointed guardians. And today, I'm just commenting based on the bill that was brought to my attention through some coworkers with Northeast Insurance Brokerage Services, which is the largest agency that Blue Cross Blue Shield is currently working with their Vermont Blue Advantage, which is just it's just an option as a Part C option.
Fox is in the room.
Yes, and I read Sarah's comments, which were, I thought, very accurate. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to add anything to Sarah's comments. I'm referring to Sarah Teachout's comments from Blue Cross. But the main concern was that when I saw this bill, I was like, who came up with this and why? I think in very short order, it seemed a waste of time to be putting this together when there are many shortcomings. I would think that many of you are aware of insofar as the Medicare Advantage plans go. They're not a perfect fit, but they're the best fit that we have for now. And I'm not seeing anything in that bill proposal that would provide a reasonable alternative to the role that those Advantage plans are currently serving. If anybody has a comment, I'd be happy to respond.
Okay. No, I think the big issue that was expressed was that when people want to come back into regular Medicare, that the cost of getting a Medigap coverage becomes prohibitive. And we
That is true.
talk about
There's-
adverse selection and trying to maintain control over the Medigap rates for people that get in when they're 65.
Correct. As I think you've aptly picked up that you know you basically you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't go into a zero premium advantage plan and wait until you're 85 years old and need extensive services and then jump into the Medicare pool or you're going to blow it up.
I think the most we've come to is just making sure that people understand when they get into a Medicare Advantage plan, make sure they read the fine print and understand that if they go to move back to Medicare, there will be a very significant cost. We found out that Blue Cross does have a guaranteed issue plan, which I think makes us feel better.
Well, as does Mutual of Omaha, and United Healthcare has some limited underwriting, but we can also use those two carriers as well.
So.
Mr. Davis, I think I just heard you say it would blow things up. Can you just articulate what the downsides are that you see in this risk? What are the downside risks that if this bill were to be implemented will cause to the insurance market for the Medicare B and so on?
Medicare B.
Medicare C plans, Medigap plans. I'm getting the terminology wrong. I struggle with this bill, sir. I just heard you say that this as a
I struggle with it too, seeing as how it's proposing to take away essentially my income, and what the income that I derive from this is both limited on an individual basis, and we do a lot of work to educate the public to make sure that they understand the difference between their initial choice when they turn 65 and they're going into Medicare. They have an initial period when they can enroll with no underwriting into a Medigap or Medicare supplement plan. I think what's very important that both you all and the public understands is that when they make that initial choice at age 65, if they choose option one, which would be a sort of more traditional path where you have Medicare, a Medicare supplemental plan, and then a separate Part D prescription drug plan, that Medicare remains the primary insurer. The Medicare supplemental plans are through private insurance companies, and that they have a 6-month window there that Sarah's outlined, where they can buy a Medicare supplement at regardless of their medical conditions without underwriting, guaranteed issue. If they choose the option of Part C, also referred to as a Medicare Advantage plan, in that case, they're giving up Medicare as their primary insurer. And in the case of Blue Cross, Blue Cross is going to become their primary insurer, or United Healthcare. Or if they're in another state, it could be Humana or Aetna or MVP. The point is that you there's a reason why these insurers charge a lower rate in that initial 6-month period, and that's because they have to take these people. And they're taking them at age 65. If you wait, it's like it's very simple in premise. It's like waiting until you're sick to go buy health insurance. You can't do it. And it's what Ann was referring to as far as negative selection. That's how any insurance pool is put together. And I watched the same problems happen before in the legislature. I brought a proposal back in 2010 through 12 with an actuarial firm. And I saw legislators bringing stuff up that they had no concept of what they were doing. And this is another example of that. And it's not, believe me, the Medicare, I've got comments right now from the hospital. I listen to them on a daily basis from my wife who works up in acute care. There are problems with the Medicare Advantage plans I'm fully aware of. But the biggest problem is that the consumer doesn't understand. And the only true, I would say, non-biased source of education that we have are brokers like myself. And there's really only a handful of us in the state. And we're paid a flat commission. I mean, the commission, to me, it doesn't matter. I get paid whether you take a zero premium or a premium that costs $300 a month. I have no skin in that game other than you understand what you're buying. And if you take our income away, we go away and go do something else, which would honestly be fine with me these days. But the bottom line is that you're not going to have an education source because you're not going to be able to replace us. And the consumer's left once again in the dark, not understanding what they're getting.
I think we realize that. I don't think that no commission, well, we're preempted from doing that.
Yes.
So we're safe. I think we're gonna focus, my concerns are more the people on the Joe Namath ads that call the telephone number. And we have no control over what they're told.
I absolutely agree with you. And I quite honestly, back when I was working as a navigator, I went from working with the state through VBSR. I was a navigator with VBSR, helping people get enrolled in the exchange. And one of the comments I had was, look, United Healthcare has been doing this longer than any insurance company. And they're the largest in the country. And they figured this out. And they have a very good, very simple piece of literature, I guess, for lack of a better word.
This is on the exchange.
It's the same. It's basically, no, this was not on the exchange, but my recommendation was that they work to come up with either use United Healthcare and let their copyright carry over, because it's virtually it's just a cleaned up version of what's in the Medicare pamphlet itself, and put that on the exchange so that if people are coming off of health plans from the exchange, there's a sort of more seamless segue into the flow of information. Because really the only other people besides people like myself that are able to work with these consumers are the SHIP counselors that work through AgeWell.
Yeah.
And they're not licensed to work with the Advantage plans.
Okay, we're gonna talk, DFR, I know, is ramping up their education program and trying to work with area agencies.
Yep.
Don't think I'm gonna be able to get them any money this month, but I think that's really where we could do the most good, is to get a mailing out. Apparently all the insurance companies get a mailing out to you when you turn 65. I think the state of Vermont or the Office on Aging, somebody should be able to get out a very simple, this is what you get. This is what you get here. Warning, once you pick one, it's going to be very expensive, probably prohibitive for you to change. So think more than this year, when you might be getting a bill for dentures. Bigger in the long term.
I think what's also, I mean, the Advantage plans, in their defense, do cover a lot for a little bit of premium. And quite honestly, for a lot of people, that's all they can afford.
Right.
The one thing that they really, that in my mind is the biggest problem with the Advantage plans, because they've come a long way, is the coverage for skilled nursing and the transition from hospitalization.
Complaints. That's where the 5 days to literally transport a patient here across the street to the nursing home. And it is literally across the street, and the hospital's not getting paid for 5 days, which is putting all of our healthcare costs up. And that, but we haven't got any control over that. I'd like to tell them they have to transport in 1 day, but that's not.
Well, even without the transport, the key is that a Medicare supplemental plan will, if you have a plan that will cover skilled nursing, which most of the ones we work with do, that it will cover that 20th first day to the 100th day of skilled nursing where some significant costs can add up, whereas
Okay.
most none of the Advantage plans do not.
Okay. Okay, committee, any questions? Okay, thank you. It's really good to hear from the other side, people that actually sell these. I think this has been helpful. I don't think we're gonna try and take away your commission because we can't. And I wouldn't be inclined to do that anyway. I think most insurance is on commission, so, yeah,
I
that's
will
like money.
I just say in closing, you know, a few years ago, I worked with DFR and we put together a meeting where CMS, which is the regulatory body for Medicare, came up from Boston, and DFR put on a seminar in Montpelier, and we had the Vermont folks from Medicaid there. We had the SHIP counselors from AgeWell and a bunch of the agents, and I thought it was a very worthwhile venture,
Yeah.
and I think that something along those lines would be helpful if the public could be involved.
Yeah, I think that's what we're looking at. And
Thank
we'll see what we can do, because yes, I don't want to stop people's choice. People have different needs but I think we want to make sure that when people make that choice, they know
Mhm.
what maybe 5 years down the line they're not getting. I think we tend to think well, this is what I need today, and I just got a $5,000 dental bill. And at 65, you don't really quite think about needing long care, skilled nursing or other things, so. Okay. Question, I have one question for you. If I buy a Medicare Advantage plan in Vermont and then I move to Florida, does that plan go with me?
No, you're both the Advantage plan or your prescription drug plan will need to be changed when you get to that state. But that change of location for you will trigger a special election period, so you can get a new Advantage plan in another state.
Okay, so you'd have to get a new Advantage plan in another
Yeah,
state.
they're
I
state
wouldn't have
specific,
to
like
get
the
another
Part D.
Medicare plan. I've got a Walgreens prescription plan. I think that would go anywhere, pretty much.
Well, if you move to another state, yeah, you need to upgrade your prescription drug or your Advantage plan, but your
Yeah, your
supplement can
Advantage
travel.
plan, your Advantage plan, if United Healthcare, you've got one here. Well, they probably go everywhere, but if you've got one that only writes in New England and you move to Missouri, you're going
Yes.
to get another plan, which may or may not be the same. Are you guaranteed that you will get the same plan at the same price?
No.
No.
Nope.
And when you're taken in, are you taken in at the age of 75 when I moved to?
The age shouldn't have anything to do with it.
Is it so I can get into that plan without any underwriting?
Yeah, you should be able to get into a plan in another state, providing that state has guaranteed issue plans available. But this
So
is
if
you're
it's not
outlining a
guaranteed-
problem that absolutely exists.
So
that
Minnesota doesn't have a guaranteed issue plan. I could be stuck.
I would say, I mean, I don't work in all the states, and I would hope maybe somebody else that does. I do know that the states that I work in and the clients I work with, we've never run into that. Meaning, I've had many clients move to other states, and that's one of the reasons I stuck with United Healthcare for so long, because they were everywhere, and you could always find a participating physician in another state.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. All right, any other questions? Okay, thank you. That's been very helpful.
Yep.
Okay, committee. I'm trying to get us finished, because I think we're gonna have to spend a lot of time on education funding and structure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, and
Get that feeling?
this bill, where are we on this? This is the Medicare Advantage Plan. The bill wants us to have open enrollment. It wants us, or on your birthday, you get open enrollment every year. It wants us to ban brokers selling or getting paid a commission to sell these. What else did it want? I probably did that in here. But I think we've been told pretty much the only thing we can do that we aren't preempted from.
Joe Davis.
Yeah, Joe Namath's probably gonna age out anytime now. That's capital insurance bill. Yes, we do have to do the insurance, both insurance bills in the next 2 weeks. Okay, 2:30. Financial regulation, let's see what it is. This bans state employees from ever getting insurance. I've been told that the retired state employees have a Medicare Advantage plan, which I gather they approved. We asked the state employees to comment. They didn't call us back. I've heard after the brouhaha last year with the governor mandating a Medicare Advantage plan, whatever settlement they got, they like. I'm personally not inclined to tell groups of people they may never do something unless it's truly evil. I don't think this references to that.
So that's sections 1 and 2. So we do not support sections 1 and 2.
I would say that is true. Now, section 2 is mediation and backup.
Thought that maybe goes wrong.
I didn't remember the section.
It's not.
It's a.
By the Madam Chair.
Yes,
So I recall testimony that we already do this. So section 4, I recall hearing that this doesn't need to be done because it's already being done. And it's unclear to me what the downside, and that's where my other question was, because I honestly don't understand this stuff. I'm trying to understand healthcare, but I've been focused on education, funding in this great state of Vermont. But for the open enrollment around a birthday, does that just translate to a higher cost, or so it's unclear to me what the downside implications are of a flexible birthday?
I'm gonna look to Sarah, that when you have 6-8 week open enrollment period, you get in then. If you have open enrollment year round, I can wait until I'm getting chest pains or until my doctor says, you're gonna need some serious orthopedic work, and go in and get the insurance that day as I'm on the way to the hospital.
Cost thing and accessibility to healthcare.
No.
Sorry?
Adverse selection.
Adverse selection is what you're worried about. You need to have a healthy pool, a big enough pool to pay the premiums to cover the cost. If your pool gets too sick or too small, then the costs go way up.
Right now, people can switch over. They just have a limited window of time, and this would make it so it's 6 months from their birthday.
It's every year their birthday plus 6 months.
Okay.
Right now, you can sign up the day you turn 65. We waited until my husband's employer stopped providing health insurance. And then you can enroll under those circumstances, and there's a bunch of circumstances listed, like you become disabled, and there's SSI. But you can enroll. But every year, there's an enrollment period. So you've got to enroll the year you turn 65 into Medicare or Medicare Advantage plan, which is fine. That enrollment period just keeps, just keeps people from waiting until they're sick to go sign up. I don't want to pay for it, so I'm just gonna not get insurance until I start having trouble breathing and I really don't want to go to the doctor because something's wrong, but I'll go sign up for my insurance. Cause we need you to be paying in while you're healthy.
What's the current enrollment period? Is it a 2-week window?
No, it's
6
Month.
months.
And this would just
I
make
guess I
it,
don't even understand, why is this bill even created in a little state like, I mean, why are we even debating this when it's a federal, these are federal norms.
Any legislature can put in a bill and it gets submitted to the committee of jurisdiction. Does it?
Okay,
Okay, if I've been hearing a lot of horror stories from my local hospital about how much they're losing and how hard it is to, I will put in a bill that says you can't do that. I don't necessarily know until the lawyers look at it that the federal government prohibits me from doing it.
okay,
So
okay.
there are several legislators who are concerned about some of the issues with Medicare Advantage. Big one being the cost of getting out and back into regular Medicare. And then I think there is a lot of concern. I mean, UVM was threatening to take any of United Healthcare's plans a couple years ago.
No, that's, I'm sorry, I balk at that. All this stuff with UVM really pisses me off because it misleads the consumer intensely. All the stuff you hear from UVM about United Healthcare is strictly on some large group, what are called commercial lines. And it's exceedingly misleading for all the poor folks that are on Medicare, because every time they hear that, when the rate hikes come around, and UVM goes back into negotiation with United Health. And United Health's a behemoth.
Yes, it is.
I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying they're not going to get pushed around by UVM. So they're
No.
going to say, no, we're not going to take those rates, and UVM's going to come back and forth. The problem is that the poor consumer that's got a Medicare plan that has nothing to do with
Okay,
gets concerned and worries and calls AARP because they get a bunch of stuff from AARP because United Health and AARP are joined
Well,
up together. I mean,
also said,
I'm sorry,
no, I'm,
1, 2, and 3, I think
Yes.
have to do with VSEA. So I'm looking at 3 again. It says last and best offer, and that's also the VSEA, which we don't know about. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
and we asked VSEA to come in and talk, and they have not called us back. I think that they're happy with the way things are going and they don't want to deal with it.
You asked where the committee is. I
Yeah.
would say I don't support 1, 2, and 3 because we haven't heard from them for all those reasons. Section 4, the testimony we've had, I don't think we need, but I don't think we heard from Senator Harrison. So maybe having her make the case as to why we need this, but she came in one afternoon.
Yeah.
We didn't hear from her because we were back.
And I had her back and then we were on the floor that day and she didn't get back in. I saw her off and just told her, I think we want to have you in so we can give you the bad news, which is we're preempted from doing an awful lot in Sydney.
So section 4, I right now I know, but I just don't see why we need to do this, and I'm being told that we already did this. I'm just talking a
Okay,
lot.
this is the one, I believe, that says, no. That if you go back into the Medicare plan, that you get to go in the Medigap at the same, under the same standards you would have gone in if you're 65. And
That's expensive too.
that,
That's the adverse
yes,
selection.
that is the
Okay.
adverse selection.
And that can blow up the.
And if you wanna come
Right.
back because you wanna come back and not because you're about to have a heart attack or need heart surgery. Blue Cross has a guaranteed issue plan. It costs more, but your risk is more.
Are we clear we can do this? Do we as a state have, but this would, do we have the right to do this, or is this a federal?
No, I think this one we can do it.
Other states do.
This is just how it's,
But
Yeah.
it would result in adverse selection and it
Yeah.
would harm the market.
I think so.
And
Thank you.
the state with our, no?
Would cost the state.
It's Blue Cross, the state doesn't.
It would certainly
But
cost.
the cost to everybody that buys a Medigap at 65
Yeah.
would
Okay.
go up if we had,
That's adverse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
adverse
Yeah.
selection.
And
That's-
people do currently have this option. It's not like they can't do it.
You can't break in. You
Okay.
can raise your hand and be recognized by the chair. Okay, so I think, I'm not hearing any stories on that one.
No.
Advertising, we heard from DFR that they are trying to upgrade their advertising and, I would like to get them some money to even do more. However, I get the eagle eye across the hall every time I mention $10,000 or so, and I don't think that would help a whole lot. But they are getting that out. If we do anything, I would like to beef that up, but I don't know how to beef it up without money.
This section 5B, I'm not sure that I understand what this is saying. No person shall advertise or sell a Medicare Advantage plan to an individual in the state who is enrolled in Medicaid or Medicare savings plan. Medicaid, I understand. What is a Medicare savings plan?
Sarah, can you?
Sure. Sarah Teachout with Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Vermont. So Medicare savings plans are government funding for people, low income people, so they can help purchase their Medicare.
But to engage in the Medicare savings plan, are you in Medicare at that point?
I believe, yes.
And aren't you then prohibited when we say no person shall sell or advertise an Advantage plan? If you're already in Medicare, can you buy an Advantage plan?
You could switch.
You could switch.
So you could switch to an Advantage plan.
Yes.
At what point? Anytime? Or,
You can, and you could lose, so I think the concern comes from the healthcare advocate, you could lose the benefits of your Medicare savings.
If you've been saving and putting money aside, and then you
Mhm.
go to another program.
There's a bill coming, I know you don't love to talk about other bills, but there's a bill that would expand the Medicare savings plan.
Mhm.
That's being considered in the House right now, and so that might be,
well, the Medicare savings plan, is that a state program as opposed to, it's a state program, right? That's the thing I was not clear on. It's a
Yeah.
state program.
correct.
And how does a Medicare savings plan work? In other words, at what point can you get into a
I think
Medicare
we'll
savings
have to have
plan
the
by
healthcare
age?
advocate in to
Yeah,
talk
what I was
about.
concerned about was, we talk about a Medicare savings plan, I assume that there's some form of Medicare plan, which you typically can't get into unless you meet age requirements, and that's why I saw the conflict between that and changing to an Advantage plan, because you normally, if you're in Medicare, you can't change to an Advantage plan, can you?
Yes,
Yes, you can,
Yes.
The point though,
and,
anytime,
but you give up, so
you give up,
Medicare
the position that you're
supplement
in.
plans are, guaranteed at a, and you. Once you leave it, then it's hard to come back. Harder.
you could go over there. I was sure that if you decide to go over there at 75, your rate would differ than if you went over at 65.
well, that's a Medicare supplement, but what I want to clear is conventional Medicare, not a Medicare supplement.
Okay,
But if you're in conventional Medicare, can you switch to an Advantage plan at any time?
okay, Mr. Davis thinks he can help us. Mr. Davis,
Yes, sir, ma'am. Let's just make sure what is exactly, just rephrase the question so I know how to specifically address it.
I'm looking at section 5,
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
and if you see subparagraph B, no person shall advertise or sell a Medicare Advantage plan to an individual in this state who is enrolled in Medicaid, and I know Medicaid is different, or in a Medicare savings plan. And my question is, if you're in a Medicare savings plan, does that mean you're already in Medicare? And potentially, could you be in conventional Medicare and have a Medicare savings plan?
I think we're gonna have the health advocate come in and talk.
The Medicare, I think you're looking at two different things. There's two things here, and I'm gonna, if we can, because there seems to be way too much confusion around the Medicare savings plan, and I think Sarah's already addressed that there's another bill looking at Medicare savings plan. So can we put, and that is a very small part of the market, at least that I'm dealing with.
But it's one that we have to deal with if we're gonna deal with this bill. And so the question is, is this something that we're even gonna consider passing if we don't know?
I wouldn't think twice that this has no business being in front of you.
Yeah.
What I can tell you is that people that are on Medicaid, think about what's the Medicaid threshold? Do we know what that is? It's roughly about $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
You think somebody making $1,000 a month can afford a Medicare supplemental plan at $212 a month?
No, this is the Medicare savings, and we are going to get the health advocate in to tell us.
Okay, but there's two things here. It says you're not going to sell an Advantage plan to somebody who's enrolled in Medicaid.
Yeah, no, this is to people with a Medicare savings account, which is a state program that helps people put away some money, or maybe subsidizes that money so that they can afford. Just over the Medicare, Medicaid one. So that they.
But I'm
can
reading the
afford-
language in B
Is it
right
right?
here. The language in the bill says right here, no person shall advertise or sell a Medicare Advantage plan to an individual in this state who is enrolled in Medicaid or in a Medicare savings plan. I'm just saying, let's shelve that Medicaid savings plan discussion for now. But this is huge, where you're saying you can't put anybody who has Medicaid into an Advantage plan.
Or so. Yeah.
Well, if you put them into a Medicaid Advantage plan and they're stuck there, they don't have the financial power to get out.
Why would they even need to get out?
Because Medicaid is paying their bills. Why would they go pay you when Medicaid is
Not
paying?
pay me. I'm saying
No,
if
but
they
Medicaid is paying their medical bills. That's what Medicaid
Okay.
is.
So they're on a zero premium Advantage plan, and then Medicaid is picking up the balance.
No, Medicaid, that's not how it works. And the question here is about Medicare savings accounts. And we will find out from the healthcare advocate what they are and how they work. And you can help.
I'm sorry, Sarah Teachout with Blue Cross. This is about advertising.
Yeah,
So I think that you're preempted from doing this section of the
we
bill.
can't tell them they can't, well,
Advertise or sell.
Okay,
yeah.
or maybe to sell.
So
Yes.
Advertise.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they came to your house and did a big pitch, it would be something, but we can't ban them from putting Joe Namath and Jimmy Walker and everybody else, the little old lady with
Well,
glasses.
again, that's what I was getting at with preemption issue.
Yeah.
Because you put Medicaid aside, I understand the issue of Medicaid, this can't be done, but Medicare savings plan, could it be done? Because the implication is if you're in a Medicare savings plan,
Right.
you're in Medicare. And so that was my question originally is, would you then sell or advertise a Medicare Advantage plan to
Right.
someone who's already in Medicare?
So,
The answer that I got, if I understand it correctly, is yes, you can change to Medicare Advantage from Medicare. So that's clear.
Yeah.
If the problem typically is going back because of adverse selection and
well,
other
there may
kinds of
be,
restrictions,
depending on
so
when you.
that's
go over.
understanding.
Yeah. you
That's
may get some
understanding. But
selection
so
over
then the
there.
question is, would this be something that is not preempted? You could advertise or sell a Medicare Advantage plan to someone in a Medicare savings plan.
Well,
Now,
that's,
I understand now that Medicare savings plan is a state creation.
yeah,
And so my question then, is there anything that would prohibit this?
that's
currently.
what we're going to find out. First, we're gonna find out what it is. And then we will get our lawyers to tell us if it's prohibited. But I think we should, this is not the Health and Welfare Committee. We should, just get Ledge Council to come in and tell us, well, I'm gonna ask the healthcare advocate because he's the one that deals in this. And we can have, Jen Carvey. Jen is just extraordinarily hard to get, come in and tell us what this is. She's just booked.
So where you asked where the committee is, I don't support section 5 because of the vagaries that are implied in the
Right.
unknowns, so
Mhm.
just.
So we need to get that done.
Then we have section 6. In the enrollment, no person, you can't pay a fee to any agent.
So
Or,
that's preempted.
that's preempted.
Yeah, we've
Clearly.
already been told that.
Yeah.
That was by MVP, right? MVP came out with major concerns against 6 and 7. I don't know.
I mean, anybody that, if you go on a line
Yeah,
to deal with purchasing a Medicare Advantage plan, you're dealing with an agent who is licensed in Vermont.
Right.
So I mean, this
we
doesn't make any
want them
sense.
to go through agents because the agents are our control mechanism. They're who we can, they're licensed by us, so we can require that they do explanation, disclosure.
Mhm.
If they don't get commission, because that's how they get paid, it's not just Medicare Advantage plans.
Mhm.
If they don't get a commission for selling those, they're not gonna sell. And I think that's just to make sure that people can't buy them.
Well, the issue here, of our witness right now is he is an agent in Vermont. But where my understanding is the selling of most of these Medicare Advantage plans advertised on TV are done by an agent who is licensed in Vermont, but that agent may be sitting in Mississippi or Florida or any place else in the world. But they are licensed in Florida the same as the agent who is here in Vermont. Is that not correct?
Can I speak to that?
You can't.
I would say, sir, that that is not correct. All the stuff that you see on the news, or you know, if you see Joe Nate, most of the advertising is just totally misleading to people because it is redirecting them into a call center, but a lot of the time, what you get is misdirection on the part of the consumer if they're not using local resources because
That
the
misdirection
plan
may in fact occur, but that is still an improper act of a licensed agent, a Vermont licensed agent, subject to the same sanctions that you.
Vermont license.
Vermont
Help me understand.
agents who are on the telephone in a Joe Namath commercial are licensed in the state of Vermont by the Department of Banking and Insurance, who are the successor to the Department of
They're
Banking. and Insurance.
selling it to, in Vermont, they're gotta be licensed.
They could be someplace else, located in another state, and typically they're licensed in multiple states, including Vermont.
Okay,
But they have to be licensed with the carrier, sir.
They have
Whoever
to
that
hold a
agent,
license with the state of Vermont to be able to sell insurance.
I have to have a license with the carrier to sell their insurance, but.
correct.
And that's not a license, that is an arrangement.
That's a contract.
A commercial arrangement, but they have to be licensed by the state regulator of Vermont in order to sell that policy, even though they're on the phone with that consumer and they are located miles or hundreds of miles away. They still have to hold a license in Vermont and adhere to Vermont licensing standards.
Okay, we have preempted from doing this, so I have no desire to do it. On section 7, license denial, non-renewal or termination causes.
I can't recall, I'm sorry,
I can't either.
can't recall testimony that strongly is persuasive in support of us doing this. All I hear was a lot of concerns about the overall cost that it will have on insured individuals as well as ambiguity as to what it was intended to do. So I'm not comfortable with voting for it as 230, but I honestly don't understand. I'm going to go with 75% of it.
I have a feeling.
But I could be persuaded. So if somebody starts making the case, well, why we need to do this, I'm just not hearing it.
I think this is,
Preempted or not.
it's saying that if you sell these things like we don't want you to, then the insurance commissioner could take action on your license, but so far, I think the only thing we're doing in this, well, we aren't even doing it. I think our best way to go is education. And just make sure that people know what the pros and cons are of anything they buy from the insurance market. I think DFR does a pretty good job of regulating that. They can't regulate Medicare Advantage plans. But I feel uncomfortable, I think, striking this whole thing and say, we're gonna do a campaign when I can't find any money to put in it. I will try begging again across the to see if I can get someone to seriously talk to me about it.
Well, there is one question, as far as the licensed agent who is selling this
Yeah.
policy, do they have any responsibility under the law that licenses them to ensure that the consumers are adequately informed, whatever that may mean?
I think DFR said yes, they did, and.
And then the
they
question
did-
is, what do they do to ensure that the agents are in fact doing that?
Well, we can ask them back. Maybe if Emily could come back like tomorrow, Friday, whenever she can get in. I think, yeah, we need to make sure that that agents are doing that and that they are disclosing, and if we have to do a disclosure sheet, but we'll talk to her about that. And then I can find, maybe Emily can find some money over there. We'll talk to her about what she's thinking and, you know, what they're doing. So I think that got a few ends to tighten up, but I'm not seeing this one having a long lifespan here. I think it may stay on the wall. I'm gonna put 236 on tomorrow for discussion. That's the aesthetics. We've citing criteria. We've had pros and cons, numerous people, but I think it's time we sat down and talked. And then the other one is the obesity drugs, which I'd like to do it, but the only place it's not covered, at least with some drugs, is in Medicaid. And $75 million all on us, so it's all our spending, which we've got this cap with Medicaid that once we hit it, we can't spend anymore. Which is the deal with the universal. We can do changes, we can fund programs if we can demonstrate that they save Medicaid money down the line. But just doing the obesity drugs, unless you get some lifestyle changes included in them, they're going to be a lifetime medication. And so,
I'm hesitant to embrace this year. I just feel like it's so new and people are still learning about how effective it is at affecting lifestyle changes even after you stop taking it. But next year, I mean, I think we should keep this.
I'm waiting for a generic.
Yeah, right.
I mean, $200 a week is pretty steep. And I'm pretty sure there'll be a generic out once the pattern is up.
When that price is in Canada. It's like
I
everything,
could probably find out.
I would be curious.
I have my Canadian Canada pharmacy bill, but $200 blood clot preventer. $200 a week here is it's gone up to $40.67, including for 3 months, including shipping from Mauritania or wherever the factory is. And it comes in 3 weeks, 3 to 6, the difference, and they're all made in the same place. It's just astounding. And yeah, I'll bet you can get the obesity drugs many places cheaper.
Think about trying it to drop 20 pounds, but
No,
Yeah.
that's what I'm afraid of. Everybody that wants to drop 20 pounds to go to the prom is gonna come in and get $200
All
worth
the
of
clothing
pills.
stores are really interested in this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's weight is a highly loaded social. It's just a highly loaded topic, and so but it is an expensive topic,
Heavy lifting.
heavy lifting, yes.
This bill.
I think we're thinking about that. The other, we've got obesity, we've got this one, and we've got the siding, and I think the siding one, I don't think obesity is going anywhere. I think the siding one is the one we haven't come to any kind of a consensus. I do have the military pension bill out there, but even the governor didn't propose it this year.
I know he's in favor of it.
I know he's in favor of.
Well, what
I'm
we
in
gotta
favor
do
of
is come back.
firefighters and policemen, but I
Well,
can't.
we gotta come back though, I think, with better statistics based on the use in other states and whether or not it has actually added to tax revenues as opposed to taking away from tax
Well, I
revenues.
think Senator McDonald figured out we needed 364 veterans working to make up for the cost, but we don't have houses for.
I don't think we have
364.
to, it's not 364 because you've got to consider spouses as well. And
Well,
that's a
they
major
don't,
factor.
they can go in the same house.
Mm.
We just don't have houses, even if people move here. We need them to move. Okay,
I just always been made on this topic, I always like to just highlight how different military service is than firefighters and policemen. They can't negotiate for better terms. They can be deployed anywhere throughout their career. They have
And the
to be-
statistics based on, if you remember, we did a study. I had 2 interns that year and I put them out on it and we collected a lot of information and data from other states that shows that that did not happen. In none of the states over the past 10 years that have enacted that, had they also enacted coverage for firefighters and other first responders. It just isn't happening.
no, you can't, it's expensive. Okay. I think that is probably it. Any thoughts on where we start, where we go? How do we get the word out to voters that if they vote for the school budgets as proposed, their taxes are going up?
Well, I think what they're looking for us is to do the other thing that tax communities do, raise taxes someplace else other than on them. And that is a lot of good, and I think that we're gonna see push from the other body to do just that.
Oh, I think we are. I think they also need to raise revenue across the hall. That was the topic in money chairs today. This is the tightest budget that's, I think Jane's ever seen.
It was 2008.
Yeah, and it's an austerity budget, so they're talking about having to go to the core functions of government. And that's not gonna be popular either.
You started the meeting out about asking, I think, putting on the table, just any thoughts and other
Yeah.
things you want to hear about. In the conversation yesterday, and to the point that Senator Brock just raised, Ways and Means got a really comprehensive presentation about your favorite topic, additional revenue sources, where they did dive into the candy tax and the soda
Yes.
tax. And whoever gave that presentation, there's even more on clothing. So I have some questions about it.
The one
Yeah.
that I was told today seems to be percolating up, because they've done it 3 times and we've never passed it, is the cloud tax. And it's a sales tax, so it would go into the education fund. When we first turned it down, and the former chair of Ways and Means was very interested in, and it kept us from coming to agreement in a committee of conference until midnight one night. So that one they're gonna do, and I can schedule some witnesses. When we first looked at it, there were only like 2 or 3 states that had done it. Now it's up to over half. So we're not the first in this one. We're starting to trail. It would put some revenue. And probably significant revenue into the ed fund. I don't think we can make enough out of the sales tax to really put a dent. I mean, if you figure to get taxes down to a 10% increase, we need $120 million.
Question is which pocket you want to have picked.
Well, yeah,
You know, because that's what we're sometimes doing, and all this discussion constantly that we're hearing about, nobody's talking about reducing expenses.
well, we're trying to make the schools do that. They're just not listening.
Yeah, well, we're not perhaps the leading on how to do it. And how to make the hard decisions that are necessary in order to do it. You can't have schools with 7 kids in a class
No,
and expect to have your costs go down.
you can't. Well, I think that further discussion is going to lead to a look again. I mean, Act 60 was a big change, especially for the formerly known as gold towns. Two of them are here this year with big increases. That was a big change and we left the local control. But I think the problem with local control is hitting us, so you can't ignore it.
Becomes local out of control.
Yeah, I mean, and voters will very likely, I talked to a lobbyist up there on the select board, I said, did you hear about your 30-40, because it was the headlines in the local paper. He says, yeah, he says, but what are you gonna do? Of the school, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's like, what are you gonna do? That's what the school expenses are going up. And I'm afraid that, yeah, voters are gonna tax some people in their communities into poverty.
I take your point, Senator Brock, that it is just taking money from a different pocket. I would just argue that tax policy can drive and motivate other and align with our policies. So for example, looking at our property tax rates, disambiguating and having unoccupied homesteads, darkened doors, pay a higher premium or a higher rate so that that is a way to use tax policy to drive housing. I would argue too as well, the sugary sweetened beverage tax is a way to align some of our health objectives. Sugary sweetened beverages are a leading cause of obesity among kids and also just health factors. So I'm not saying ban it, but it's a way to align our tax policy with it. And even on the streaming services, I think there is an argument to be made that they are selling content that's developed outside of the state into this market without paying.
I think it's a given unless Kirby comes back and tells us we can't, that we're gonna do something with that for the pegs. And then we've gotta remember to ask joint fiscal, because how much of an excise tax do we put on to raise the money? I'm kind of glad if they only need 3 million that we didn't do the pole attachment, we'll do 1, 6 or 8, but way more than they needed, which might encourage excess spending. I think that one, if it's legally possible, we're gonna do. But there's room there. The cloud tax, there is room. It's a very active part of the economy. And if I buy a program in a store, which I don't even know now, if I buy it, I get a cardboard thing that tells me what the website is and what my ID number is. And then I pay the tax there when I download it. And that was always the argument. If I buy it in a box, I pay a tax.
Mhm.
If I so I buy TurboTax was the thing. Well, now you can get TurboTax in the cloud and you don't even have to buy it. You just use their platform to do your taxes. And the argument is you're doing the same thing with the same product, just delivered in a different form. And you should probably be taxed the same.
But it's with everything else. And the point I was trying to make on the floor today is we need to look at all of this holistically. And we won't be able to do it in this session just because of time and money and so on, but we need to do it. We need to schedule it. Anything that we do now, we ought to consider a temporary patch. Because just as we talk about, if you buy it in the store as opposed to buy it online, it has tax implications. Well, it has tax implications if you buy it in the store and you don't buy it in the store, because then the store ceases to exist because they can't support it, and on and on and on. And unless we step back and do what we alleged that we were going to do with the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission, we're going to have this over and over and over again. Every time we talk about raising money, we're gonna have this discussion over again because we forgot to deal with the concomitant issue that occurs over here with another tax.
So we don't have the money. I would like to hire a consultant to help us think about how to restructure our schools, but I don't think I'm gonna get $200,000 or $300,000, maybe 500 sticks in my mind to get a good study. The money's not there, and
Well, the money to do, in effect, what we did with the Tax Commission also has some money. I see I'm glad to see that Senator Bray has the printout of the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission on his desk. I've got it on my computer. It's right there on JFO website. You know, the roadmap of how we did what we did. I think they did excellent work for what they did.
The first one
Unfortunately, they
did.
just weren't allowed to finish it.
Well, the second one,
The second one was worthless.
well, you didn't get the answer you wanted on the property tax, I know that.
Well, we
But they-
didn't
no,
get a
they-
complete answer because
No.
again, we're trying to do, as I recall, partially in the middle of the beginning of the pandemic and, you know, a whole bunch of things that just,
You had three people who each one did their own tax.
Yeah.
The original one.
Yeah.
And it was politically diverse.
correct.
They had to come to a consensus report, and there was a minority, but most things they agreed upon. Yeah, but they had a precise charge, which the second one didn't, so they just went off and did their thing. And that charge was to make Vermont more competitive in the market, because we have a very high top marginal tax rate compared to other states, but you only pay that tax rate on the money you make over.
Mhm.
I think it's 320,000 or something now.
You can see how much different everything is after their work.
Yeah, and it was a lot higher, so we collapsed those top two tax rates to get the margin down. Because you only pay, the money you make in the first tier, you pay that tier tax rate on it, so you only pay the top tier on the money you make over and above that amount. So they did a lot of that, what was the other thing? Other states, sales taxes was something else. That we did a lot of work on, but they were coming out of that. We tried, I know the Ways and Means, because they have all day, did a lot of work trying to get the median, middle income tax rate down. And couldn't find a way to do it until the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which gave us $30 million in revenue, which we then rewrote the tax code to give it back.
Just the comment you made about finding money, 300,000 for consultant. I agree. We should not be looking for that this year. And this is not a slight on the governor. It's not a slight on Heather Boucher. What I would like to see is a permanent Secretary of Education come in and start to take this bull by the horns and set us in a direction with some leadership. And if that's Heather, great. Let's put her in there permanent. But I understand interim roles. It's hard to make those
No, This is
cases.
her second interim.
Yeah.
She should either be the secretary, or we need a secretary. We need leadership over there. None of the usual things they did, like why is spending going up, what categories are going up with school budgets. None of that got done until I believe Joint Fiscal asked them to do it in November, and I said, well, they could. Now they were transitioning out of Brad James. Brad James held the taxing system in his head.
So we still have, for example, we haven't yet, in effect, the common use of common chart of accounts. So that we're accounting for it, and this has been going on for at least 15 years. We haven't done it.
No, we have not. I mean, it's the only thing we're doing is to get a
I
unified calendar.
Mm.
That's why Montpelier couldn't merge with U32, because they couldn't reconcile their calendars.
So I was the faculty senate president at UVM, and I made my bones on the academic calendar, so I have a lot of scars from those conversations.
Yes.
Around these tests.
We know we need it, but I don't know that they want us to know as much as we could learn if we had it. And what do we do?
So I would like that secretary, be it Heather Boucher, whoever the permanent is, to come in and say what study we might need to do, just so that we're not going in this direction, only to have a secretary take us in another. The other thing I want to say about cloud tax, if I could.
Yeah,
So I'm not necessarily, I'm against it. I'm just concerned with value added taxes, because if you put it on PaaS, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, it will compound and you're taxing inputs into business processes. So I would just like, in that slide deck, they do recognize there are 3 types of cloud-based software.
Oh, yes.
Software as a service is consumption-based. So as long as there's distinction that we're looking at point of consumption, so it's a consumption tax and not a business inputs tax.
right,
That's
and
what the question's about.
that we we will deal with. There's a lot of business to business, and then there's, I buy this, but then I improve it to work for, well, we do a lot of that, you know.
You resell it, you have to.
Yeah. So and now that we've got 24, 23 states that do it, we have the advantage of their experience. I was at an NCSL financial meeting, and the speaker there advised us, just go easy, don't get too greedy. But I think, yeah, we've put it off in this committee several times. But I think our Texas structure is solid enough now, so we can move it forward. Maybe we'll look at it.
On the issue of taxes, where are we gonna find the money? I don't know enough to give an answer to this question. I don't know if the committee does, but I do think it's worth asking, which is, we kind of backed off on the high income surcharge. The marginal surcharge, that came up for a while, and then we backed off rather quickly. And the argument has merit. There's certainly any kind of tax has a point of diminishing returns. And the idea that a high tax or a tax on a high margin is going to drive the wealthier people in a state is not something that I can easily just brush off and say, "Yeah, ridiculous." But, you know, who's it, Jerry, Ben and Jerry's, one of them.
Yeah.
Who was on the news saying, you know, he says, okay, my taxes.
Yeah.
It's a privilege to live here. I know, just by way of example, my son was living in Jackson, Wyoming, in '08 when the market collapsed. He was a carpenter. And I said, you know, are you in trouble? Are you losing business? And he said, no, there's a class of people in this country where a significant drop in the market means that they're worth a few $100 million less this week, and that really doesn't touch the quality of life. And they keep spending. And he said, no, he said, my phone's ringing off the hook in the middle of that time. So I'm not convinced that we can't get away with the marginal surcharge. We did it with Snelling, you know, we did it under Governor Snelling, and it worked.
Short term.
Yeah,
Short term.
well, short term, but you have to have a short term reason, and we didn't back off. We took some testimony, so we know what it is. It is a revenue bill, therefore it needs to start in the House.
Oh, yeah.
And they are working on a wealth tax. So when
Okay.
that bill comes, they're working on two of them.
One is 3% on income 500,000 and above,
Okay,
and then the other is the tax on the realized capital gain.
yeah,
But we can get ourselves ready for that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. That's
So-
You know, you say it doesn't happen, but I've seen it happen.
And what?
The issue of wealth flight.
no, I didn't say it doesn't.
Yeah, and
I said there's
it
a
is
point of
not,
diminishing return.
it is not
Okay.
insignificant.
I'm going to declare as the chair.
Mhm.
There, I forget what the first topic is off thing. But the other one is whether rich people come or go if we raise taxes. Because it is an internal, it's almost like a religious belief, and no one is going to change anyone's mind.
But there are statistics,
Yeah,
there are
and we-
ways
yeah.
to measure whether or not that happens.
The ones
And there are
I've seen
income
are
statistics produced by the tax department and by the federal government, so you can in fact
we
measure.
will, if they can get those, we will get them when the
Yeah.
bills get.
But one thing that you have to do though, is you have to do it in a little more sophisticated way than we typically see it. Because what happens is people who move here, you know, and the notion that we are getting people whose income doesn't change, what happens is the same thing that happens when people here move elsewhere. What happens is people who have a large amount of income want to transfer that income to a place that doesn't tax it as much, and that's where the timing difference is not the same of the losing state and the gaining state.
Okay, and we will.
And we just, that is one thing that typically isn't done well, and we have to do that.
And another thing I think we should put is the other side of the equation.
Yes, yes, well, Senator McDonald's going,
Yeah.
we can continue this. I can go on live, but not while we're talking about topics.
The other side of the other side of the equation, which is the expenses. it's often said, it's cliche, that we're asking our schools to do more than they used to do. And I think if we really wanted them to do those things, then it's understandable.
Yeah.
And it's probably bad math to compare today's expenses with earlier years' expenses, because they're two different. But the other thing is, I think there may be, I know for in particular, you mentioned standardized tests. And I would be willing to look at, if a kid can pass the standardized test and show that they've gained mastery, that there's no need for them to.
Well, that's the issue. We have the highest cost per pupil, or second highest in the country, next to New York. We have mediocre test grades. If you're spending that much money, and they're spending it on their teachers, and maybe we should think about that. But if you're spending that much money for a pupil, you should be able to expect that you're gonna do much better than average on your test. And we aren't, and that's, I think, what's driving such a concern.
I just wanted to say, and then I'll shut up, Chris, it's all yours.
Chris.
I was educated K through 12, actually K through bachelor's degree in New York.
Yeah,
And I know my liberal friends tend to dislike standardized tests. They see this inherently punitive. I was a lazy and indifferent student. I was already on my way to become the next Bob Dylan. And school was not very interesting to me. The New York State Regents were my lifeline.
the New York State Regents.
Did you qualify?
I had a lousy grade point average. I had a C minus average,
But he takes a test really well.
but I aced the Regents. You know, and went to college. I've had a lot.
But New York does have that statewide test. I took it in the 50s when I was in school there. They do have a standard, and you had better meet the region's standard or you were in trouble. We are not meeting the region's standard. You know, New York is spending more than we are, but they're getting it. Guy up here today said they're getting much better results. And I think if we were getting excellent results, there'd be a lot less complaining about the cost, but we aren't. And I really am concerned that we are going to see an increase in homelessness. Because if your house goes up for tax sale, we don't have any place for you to downsize. There's just no alternative out there. And I'm concerned about that. I don't want to, young couples that have just bought a home, young anybody, they're mortgaged to the hilt. They're just, they're paying 50% of their income in their mortgage and insurance. They're in no place to absorb a couple $1,000 in increased, even $1,000 in increased property. I went door to door a number of years ago. And it was enlightening to me because people were yelling about the tax rate. That might be the year it hit 5% because the 70 was clawing up too. And I kept saying, but you get, you pay in your income. And it took me a while to understand that even paying on your income, an awful lot of people can't afford that extra $10 that got added on because school costs went up. There's a lot of people that are living that marginally in this state, and they're gonna see an increase, significant increase, and that's disturbing.
I don't remember the figure that Senator Pearson shared for a few years, 3 years ago, maybe. It was very sobering. It was like, and the percentage of Vermont families that had, like $800 or less in students, very little capacity, so of any kind of expense. And, it's on the comparisons with New York, it's not easy to do because of this whole chart of accounts issue, but the degree, I don't know the degree to which Vermont is spending the same amount of money in education versus social services and nutritional services all delivered at a school. So how much of it's really education? How much of it, what if, I don't know if our social service programs are richer, so we're relatively expensive and the education piece lags some.
I think we don't have a social service program. Each school, because we have pretty much gutted our mental health system, who should be supplying those services. But if you level fund them, and you continually level fund them, we got, what did we get? We put up so that no one made less than $11 an hour. That was several years ago. And they had a big drop off, especially in their home care people during COVID, because normally their home care people, the people they were caring for went out during the day on programs, and that didn't happen. But they don't have the staff to provide the level of service that the schools have. And we might want to look at what would be the most efficient way to deliver those services, which are becoming more and more.
So to deliver and to account for.
Yes.
And that's one of the major problems, what we see all kinds of statistics. And most of them are inaccurate for
Yeah,
one reason or another. Not the least of which is you can have statistics that are dealing with the same subjects, but aren't counting the same things. And the classic here is what Chris has talked about, and that is, if you talk about social services, the question then becomes, how is the particular state that you're measuring counting those services? What bucket is it putting them in? And if it's putting them in the social services bucket in state A, and it's putting them in the education in state B, comparing the two states on the basis of
it's not the
expenses,
same.
you're not gonna get a valid, and this is why we have a licensed economist.
Yes,
There's no standards.
To Senator McCormick's original point that you two both built on, I absolutely agree. We're asking more and more of our schools to do things with mental health, with healthcare, with social services in
we're
various
not
ways.
asking them, they're arriving in their schools and they're dealing with them.
And I think beyond performance measures like the Regency thing, I think we can come back to that common ledger so that we can track and account for across districts, how much we're spending in those things to look for efficiencies and performance impairments, but. So I really agree with your point.
Well, our camera, nope, it seems to be back.
Right.
Okay, it says we're on.
Well, I pulled out what I thought was my plug, and it was another plug. It's back in now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, look.
Okay, well, I think,
Just one more thing.
Yes.
So we're looking at New York State by comparison. I feel like, it's like the lightning bug in Vermont with there's this huge financial services industry in New York State.
well, it's
All
got a
that shit
huge
industry.
cash cow in New York City. I mean, the money there,
They can.
we just,
afford it.
we don't have the tax base.
Mhm.
And hopefully we can improve it a little bit if we can get some more middle class worker people in here and put a few more kids in our school, so maybe we can have 8 grades. I mean, it's really interesting, and I'm finding, Stowe said in here the other day, they had 800 kids in their school. But another senator said, he had read in the newspaper, and he had it, that they graduated 8. So I don't know who's getting the numbers. I think I want to look into it, but I think so where do we start? I mean, we had the school, I pretty much heard the schools say yesterday, if the voters turn us down or you put a 10% cap, we can deal with it. So I almost had the feeling they were asking us to make them do.
Unfortunately, what they can't get done in a vote.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's kind of contrary to the way we've always operated on the
Yeah.
one hand, but on the other hand, what we have right now is chaos.
Yeah,
But these votes might prove to go down.
They might.
The voters might weigh in here.
But what we have often though, is we also have the education industry that says, we're imagine, we can't do anything,
no, we have,
and Part of it is the rules that we've established on the other hand, but part of it also is self-fulfilling prophecy to some extent.
Necessity is mother vomit in that foundation.
Yeah, and again, it's size. You know, you can't economically educate 34 kids in 5 grades. I mean,
Correct.
you have 10 kids, but some schools you can't have more than 10 kids. Some schools you can't have more than 5 kids in a grade. And you're paying a teacher when you could pay the teacher the same amount to work with 20 kids.
Or also you have the situation in which you have the need for a behavioral para-educator for each kid, and every school elsewhere does not operate that way. And one of the questions that to me, and this is a question for educators to answer, and so it's probably the province of the education committee, is when you mainstream kids who are disruptive and who need a minder all the time, what effect does that have on the other kids in the class?
That gets to,
You know, to what extent do you damage particularly potentially high performing kids by placing them in that environment?
and we are seeing that.
If I could pick up on that. really quick.
Okay, no, we are seeing nice middle class kids be migrated to public or to private schools. And a lot of it has to do with, my kid can't learn because the kid next to him keeps punching him in the arm or is screaming or is just the behavior, and especially in early grades.
And the teacher can't control
Yeah. And I mean, the shocking thing to me when I went to education was the level of violence that the schools are dealing with. That it wasn't there when my kids went through, it most certainly wasn't there when I went through. But schools cannot expel kids anymore. And schools cannot put them in detention. You can't get sent home from school. You can do in-school detention, but we've taken some of the tools that could be used for, but if you expel a kid, he's just out in the streets because the parents are working.
Anybody here saying that, nobody's here saying that we don't need paraeducators, there
No.
are kids that need them, but I'm concerned from the testimony yesterday and the hallway conversations that we just don't have clarity on when a threshold is met to justify that additional staff aid, which is where these school budgets are. 80% of a school budget is people.
You look at some of the stats, again, you start looking at statistics and it tells you that we have inconsistency because you look at the number, the percentage of kids who are in certain kinds of programs or who have IEPs and so on a school by school basis, and it differs
Oh, yeah.
in schools in the same general area. And that tells you that there's an inconsistent application.
Okay, so.
That's really Senate education, but I mean, if we want to take it because it's driving us.
I've already served my time on Senate education.
Yeah,
Don't mention,
I
never
don't,
want to
yeah,
go back there.
I can ask them, but, they pretty much see this school funding project is ours, and if to solve it, we have to figure out what's driving it. And I don't think we can write any law. Well, if we write any laws and vote it out, and go to them. And they can do with it, so we've got to find a solution, and I don't feel comfortable standing up on a soapbox and saying, vote down your school budget.
Mhm.
Because I think the schools are trying to do the best education they can.
But we can't say this is up to the voters. It is up to you to approve these spending levels.
Well, that's the way the system is set up, and I'm getting very tired of telling all the, banning flavored cigarettes as start out with. Now that the state is planning to raise our property taxes 20%, I say, okay, to start with, I chair the tax committee and I am not planning on raising your taxes 20%. Your voters may raise your taxes, you may raise your taxes, but I'm not gonna do it unless you make me. But it's that kind of just misinformation is out there, like we're doing it. And they have no role in that.
They don't say it was the state, it's politicians in Montpelier are raising.
Yes.
In everybody's defense, it's an extremely confusing system. So,
Which again goes back to that issue, is whose responsibility is it to straighten that out? In terms of simplifying it, making it understandable for the voters.
We write the rules.
Well,
We
yeah,
write it all.
I think we're gonna have to have that discussion. And I don't think many schools are going to like that discussion. But if they can't control their spending, then we're gonna have to find another way to fund education at a level that the average working person can afford.
So, I mean, I've got the solution. I've got the simplified tax form right now. It only has 2 lines on it. On line 1, place your adjusted gross income for the past year. Line 2, pay the amount on line 1.
and we gotta sell, but
That's
to
a
your point
Republican
here,
joke. Yeah.
to your
Trying
point,
to tell,
to your point, Chair Cummings,
Yes.
it's not just about that funding, I'll just bring it back to, as you know, it's the spending. So
Yes.
what we're spending in our schools and that staff to student ratio carries with it this cost that
we
is
have the highest
unsustainable.
of everything, and that is not a good place to be, because it's leading us to the highest cost. And we have second to highest cost per pupil, I mean, and we aren't really compared, we're not comparable to New York for small, normal states. We're at the top.
Well, yeah, no, I've also seen statistics. I've got to test them to ensure they're right. That were done some time ago. That said, if you take Vermont and you take performance on standardized tests of students, that if you exclude BIPOC students who are in much greater percentage and particularly are lower scored in some other states, if you take them out of the equation for both states, we're much lower than we appear to be on the surface.
Oh,
And you count white students only. The statistics change, and again, that's a case of,
well, that's why we weight lower income English as second language. We did not have a whole lot of BIPOC population here. I remember I had a friend I was working with, and she saw the state census and said, well, I think my son and I are the Hispanic population of Vermont. It was that low. But we have now. And yeah, when you're learning English, it takes a while to learn and then to be able to do advanced math and stuff in a different language. So, yeah, other states have a lot larger.
But we also have a demographic that is discriminated against in subtle ways. And certainly
People.
economically, no, I would say multi-generational native Vermonters.
Oh, yes.
This is a colonized state in
Yes.
many ways. And I remember talking with a woman from Sharon about some of their kids get tuition to Hartford and some to Hanover. The native Vermonter kids never go to Hanover because they don't feel welcome there and they don't feel respected.
There, yes,
good conversation.
there are some strange little pockets here. This was, Al Cap used to say, he didn't have to go south to find Appalachia. This was an isolated mountain, and I've always told my other chair that along with the color of wash, you should read the book For White Trash, because there's the English, you ship people here, they were Scotch Irish, they went into the mountains. Down here, it was a lot of French Canadians and Abenakis. And they have been just traditionally rural, poor, isolated. Until recently. I mean, the reason we have all these little local schools is because you couldn't get anywhere during the winter because it snowed. And we're still holding on to some of that, but yeah, I think the minority, I don't want us to forget, are the native Vermonters that have been here. The Abenakis are native Vermonters, but the French Canadians came down and were discriminated against. There is a picture of a Klan meeting on the State House steps in 1922, 27, of 1920s, and it wasn't 3 people. It was a big crowd.
My mother, who's still alive, grew up.
She's
scratch.
really doing well.
She is.
It was a year
She
ago.
was in hospice
Yeah.
and she came out.
Wow.
Growing up in Brattleboro, she said, she saw signs Irish need not apply
Oh, yeah.
in windows, so that's, in her lifetime, that was still a category
Oh, yeah.
not entirely welcome
You know,
folks. And her uncle who ran a children and women's clothing store was visited by some local merchants who told him what he should and should not sell. And that when he left the store, he should walk on that side of the street home, not this side. So.
the good old days. Okay, I think we have-
Good old days.
Milk this one as much as we're
Yeah.
going to today. I'm just gonna try and organize this and find out. I think it's so huge. I'm just having trouble figuring out where we start. And a lot of it is gonna depend on how the vote goes on town meeting day. So I think,
Well, will it? I don't know how much we're gonna see on town meeting day because of this delay to April. I'm not sure.
that's
we're gonna-
right.
If the majority of people move to April, what we're gonna see basically are the letters that we get in our inboxes.
Well, I think the ones that are going up, the big ones that have chosen not, I think what we'll get on town meeting day are those small towns that thought they could spend up to 10% and, I think those are gonna get backed off real quickly because they're not capped. But the big schools with the big increases, they all seem to be putting their budgets through on town meeting day, and that's where we'll see
Yeah.
the big changes. Well,